Recently, I completed another playthrough of Hotline Miami for the first time in several years, and I was blown away with how brilliant it was. Not just was the gameplay just as enjoyable as when I first played it, but the narrative of the game was so clever and thoughtful that I felt it deserved a closer analysis. Like many postmodern narratives, a good amount of context is needed to understand the point of the story. Like many other art forms, the infancy of games led to them being labeled as juvenile, toys, something only immature people would have passion for. Many of the cases calling for censorship in games stem from a sort of moral panic, such as the fatalities from the Mortal Kombat series or the various criminal acts a player is free to commit in the Grand Theft Auto series. Even though video games were granted First Amendment rights in a 2011 US Supreme Court decision, video game censorship is still a highly prominent thing in the Western world, being most prevalent in Germany and Australia. In Germany, for example, the localization team often faces headaches as they must virtually remove every trace of Nazi imagery from their games, with some unintentionally hilarious results.
Verstanden? Haben Sie keinen Respekt vor Autorität? Ihre Worte gewähren Einblick in einen höchst verräterischen Geist. I am so sorry, mein Führer. Sind Sie denn ein Idiot? No, mein Führer. Sind Sie ein verkleideter Schurke, ein Jude? Ein verräterischer Jude? No, mein Führer. I'm from Arizona. Sie, mein Kanzler. Verstanden? Haben Sie keinen Respekt vor Autorität? Ihre Worte gewähren Einblick in einen höchst verräterischen Geist.
Es tut mir so leid, mein Kanzler.
Sind Sie denn ein Idiot?
Nein, mein Kanzler.
Sind Sie ein verkleideter Schurke? Ein Verräter? Ein niederträchtiger Verräter!
Nein, mein Kanzler. Ich komme aus Arizona.
This happens simply because video games aren't given the same special exemptions for use of Nazi imagery that film has. To this day, the game development industry has an air of self-censorship about it. Many games are practically guilty of the glamorization of violence that games are often accused of. It's just that they are against things like aliens or monsters. For human-type enemies, this extends to giving enemies a broad and generic label such as gangsters, mercenaries, terrorists, or any other morally dubious trope complemented by appropriate settings, such as jingoistic wars or crime-ridden cities, that assist in the dehumanization of the enemies. Hotline Miami sharply contrasts these supposed norms of game design by crafting a narrative around a series of absolutely brutal acts of violence with no justification. No explanation is also given, with the final message of the game being that games often feature violence and that games are fantasies, so it is pointless to waste time developing justifications for the player's actions. Hotline Miami opens with a frame narrative in which our protagonist Jacket is accosted by three masked individuals, Richard, Don Juan, and Rasmus. Each treat Jacket in a different way. Richard seems to have a neutral opinion of Jacket and only asks him questions. Don Juan seems to care for Jacket and shows concern for him. Rasmus is openly hostile towards him. The story then jumps to 1989, where Jacket receives a package containing a rubber rooster mask and a note instructing him to go retrieve a briefcase. The narrative's justification for this is that the note implies that Jacket is somehow being threatened or coerced. Furthermore, after completing this level, Jacket is forced to kill a homeless man in self-defense, afterwards in which he vomits, indicating that he does have some aversion to violence. This idea of Jacket being averse to violence and having a more human side to his personality is expanded early upon in the game when he rescues a young woman who is being held captive as a sex slave. The girl doesn't have much of a role in the story. She barely even has a character of her own. Her purpose in the story is to tether Jacket to some kind of normalcy. This is emphasized in a subtle story thread where, despite knowing about Jacket's murder spree, the girl chooses to remain with him, and it's implied that they begin an intimate relationship. To further normalize Jacket's actions is the character called Beard. After every level, Jacket visits one of several locations, all of which seem to have the same employee, who always greets Jacket as an old friend, makes a comment on the situation, and gives him some stuff for free. Through these brief segments, we can glean some useful information. In one segment, the player learns that their hapless victims are Russian gangsters. In another, we learn that the city lives under fear and that bars and clubs are struggling to fill the seats. Investigating Jacket's apartment uncovers that Jacket keeps a collection of news reports about his crimes, further shrouding his morality. It also becomes clear that Jacket is not the only one receiving the calls, as other agents can be seen, usually long dead or near death after Jacket arrives. Hotline Miami quickly settles itself into a cycle where the player starts a level in Jacket's apartment, gets a message, goes to the location, slaughters everyone, and ends the night at one of the establishments. This cycle continues uninterrupted until Jacket is visited by the 3 masked characters or something else happens. The characters with the masked characters are cryptic. They prompt Jacket to reflect on his actions and ask him why he is doing the things he does. They also give him premonitions that seem to make no sense and warn him of impending doom for himself and others. On one level, Jacket is told to go to a phone company's headquarters and kill a rogue agent. Jacket complies, but after this things begin to take a mysterious turn. Jacket begins to hallucinate. He sees the images and ghosts of his victims invading his personal life, and no one but him seems to be aware of it or even concerned, and the friendly Kirk is replaced by a far more hostile man who resembles Jacket's victims. Other characters reflect on the nature of the situation and saying that nothing is really happening. It all comes to a head when the bald man, named Richter, shows up to Jacket's house, kills the girl, and leaves Jacket in a coma. Richard also appears for the final time, telling Jacket that this was inevitable and that his actions no longer matter. The following level is a far cry from the others. Here, Jacket must escape the hospital using stealth. Action games using stealth sections to change up the pace is a common and frequently critiqued design element, but the most important aspect of this level is that the game breaks the fourth wall, and where the player usually gets tips and advice, they now receive text like this. Following this is one of the biggest but subtlest changes in Hotline Miami's gameplay, the enemies. Jacket storms the police headquarters to kill Richter, and he is willing to mow down anyone in his way, including the police. This sharply contrasts earlier levels in the game where the player felt justified killing dozens simply because they were gangsters. We even get some insight into the minds of the enemies, as the police chief desperately tries to increase morale by telling his men that as long as they remember their training, they will survive. Subsequently, after every enemy is dealt with, Richter is finally confronted, but he only acts with indifference and tells Jacket that he has no information for him. To rub salt in the player's wounds, they even have the choice of killing Richter or just leaving him, even though they had no choice but to kill all the cops. Subsequently, after sealing the notes of the police investigation, Jacket assaults the nightclub where the mob is based. He finds the hideout of the boss and then kills the manager. Even though he has done nothing wrong and even offers to help Jacket, the player has no choice but to kill him to proceed. After killing several bodyguards, Jacket finally reaches the mob boss, who he battles. After his defeat, Jacket is asked what drives him before the boss commits suicide to deny Jacket the pleasure of killing him. Jacket then goes upstairs and kills a Don. Now it's all over. He lights one up. Gazes fondly at an old photograph. And lets it go. Fade to black, credits roll, game over. Wait a second, that's it? That's the end? But there's so much left unanswered. What is 50 Blessings? What is the Russo-American Coalition? Who was leaving messages on the answering machine? What was the deal with the bearded guy? What happened in San Francisco? What did the biker mean when he said he was so close? What was the point to all of this? Act 5 basically comes from nowhere, and it's a pleasant surprise to finish off the game. We play as the biker, and right off the bat, we're thrown into a wild ride. The most important aspect of the biker is his motivation, boredom. Jacket's motivation is deliberately vague for most of the game, but the biker makes it clear that he goes out killing just because he's bored. In short, the biker represents the player. Just as we played the game because we were bored, so did the biker join 50 Blessings. We were enticed by the trailer featuring a man in the pig mask, and Biker was lured in by the man with the pig mask. Biker is also more well-adjusted than Jacket. His apartment is nicely decorated, and it is clear that he is more social than Jacket. The most important difference between Biker and Jacket is that Biker is far more merciful, sparing the lives of several people, when Jacket mercilessly kills people who've done nothing wrong. In the end, Biker tracks down the perpetrators behind the phone calls and confronts them. I imagine that many people who play this game were at first confused by this, and I'm certain that it was intentional. The two janitors are representations of the game's developers, Dennaton and Dennis. There's some great symbolism at work here. A stand-in for the players is demanding answers from the stand-in for the developers. Here, the janitors mock our efforts to justify our actions, and they state that this is just a game, brag about being independent, and brag about how rich they're getting. Regardless of what questions we ask, we have to leave them, with our questions still unanswered. However, there's a computer terminal that can be unlocked with a password. If the player goes through all the levels, hunting down these minuscule letters and arranges them in the right order, they can access the computer and interrogate the janitors. Doing so reveals that 50 Blessings is a neo-nationalist terror group who commands people to kill Russians, seemingly to disable this Russo-American coalition. The janitors reflect on how easy it is to manipulate people into doing what they want, and how similar operations are being set up all over the country. The biker decides he's heard enough and leaves them. And so ends Hotline Miami, a game that's violent just because it can be. Hotline Miami set out to prove that a game doesn't need to have a story to justify its violence, because in the end, Hotline Miami is just that, a game. Hotline Miami didn't set out to question the nature of violence or the fragility of the human conscience, it just tried to be fun, and it was. Just as the biker moves on from Miami, so we, the player, move on to another game. In an era of walking simulators and other interactive mediums that numb what games can achieve as an art form, it is important that we remember that art is something inherent. The more effort we spend trying to prove it, the more we invalidate it. Art doesn't always mean making a statement or changing the world. Sometimes it's just about turning off your brain and killing some gangsters.